Sexual intimacy, the most powerful force a man can experience, and the most dangerous one to misunderstand. Carl Jung discovered that when a man completely withdraws from this act, when he abstains from the constant pursuit of pleasure for just 90 days, something extraordinary begins to happen. He recorded transformations so intense they defied logic. Unreal levels of focus, a magnetic presence that seemed to pull others instinctively, and a surge of creativity that felt as if it came from somewhere beyond human understanding. But here's what Jung found most disturbing. Most men will never reach this state, not because they can't, but because they're afraid of what they might uncover once they stop hiding behind their own desires. Every ancient culture understood a truth modern men have forgotten. The Spartans before battle, the samurai in discipline, monks in silence, and visionaries like Tesla and Newton all knew that a man's sexual energy is sacred. Left uncontrolled, it scatters him across temptations. Directed with purpose, it turns him into a force that cannot be ignored. Jung spent decades decoding this phenomenon. He noticed that some men carried an almost supernatural presence, focused, composed, alive, while others drifted through life in mental fog. The difference wasn't intelligence, luck, or upbringing. It was energy. How they handled the most primal part of themselves. When this energy is consciously guided, rather than unconsciously drained, it doesn't just enhance what a man does, it redefines who he is. Jung found that this transformation always follows a distinct pattern. 3 ruthless stages that appear again and again across time and culture. And knowledge exists. The roadmap is real, but most will never touch it because it demands the ultimate price, mastery over desire. In this video, I'll walk you through Jung's exact framework for channeling this hidden power, the 3 brutal stages every man faces, and why most turn back before the real transformation begins. By the end, you'll hold the blueprint, but whether you live it or lose it, that choice is yours. There's a transformation that no one ever warns men about. It doesn't arrive with a grand revelation or an inner explosion. It comes quietly, through silence. When the chase for pleasure suddenly ends, whether by decision, rejection, or simple exhaustion, it doesn't bring peace right away. It creates emptiness. That emptiness feels strange, weightless, and disorienting. A man expects calm or clarity, but what greets him instead is a hollow stillness. Without the pursuit, without the teasing messages, the validation, the thrill of anticipation, time stretches unnaturally. Days begin to feel slower. There's no target to aim for, no reward to crave, no excitement to anchor his energy. And in that stillness, his rhythm starts to break apart. This is the first silence after years of constant inner noise, not external chaos, but the subtle hum of sexual drive that had always directed his thoughts, movements, even the way he entered a room. When it disappears, the machine slows down, and that's when he first encounters the quiet. Carl Jung viewed libido as something greater than physical desire. He saw it as psychic energy. When that force stops being expressed outwardly, it begins to accumulate within, searching for direction. But this isn't transformation yet. This is only the doorway. What happens next depends entirely on how the man responds to the stillness. Most try to escape it. Only a few have the courage to stay within it. When that sexual rhythm fades, the first thing that begins to crumble isn't the body, it's the persona, the social mask, the image he's performed for so long that he forgot it wasn't real. For years, maybe decades, that mask was built around being desired, admired, or chosen. Without that dynamic, the ego starts to collapse. This unraveling isn't loud or dramatic. There's no obvious breakdown, just subtle discomfort. His favorite clothes suddenly feel wrong, his usual jokes fall flat, and his reflection in the mirror looks unfamiliar. Jung described the persona as necessary, a bridge between the self and society, but he warned that identifying too deeply with it leads to disaster. Once the mask becomes the man, any crack in it feels like death. And when sexual pursuit disappears, that identity begins to decay. He's no longer being noticed the same way. The rituals that once gave him validation lose their power. That's when many panic. They scramble for old habits, familiar distractions, or fleeting pleasure, anything to feel alive again. But for the man who chooses awareness, this collapse isn't destruction, it's revelation. It exposes how much of his identity was built around the need to be wanted. In that exposed space, he faces the hardest question of all. Who am I when I am no longer being chosen? When the mask begins to shatter, the symptoms appear suddenly, raw, unpredictable, and without mercy. They're not calm or rational. They strike like withdrawal, because that's exactly what they are. For many men, sex was never merely about satisfaction. It was emotional regulation, a way to control dopamine, escape discomfort, and feel desirable without ever facing vulnerability. When that outlet disappears, the nervous system rebels. Anger comes first, short tempers, sudden irritability, the feeling that the world owes you something it refuses to give. But beneath that fury lies something heavier, emptiness. Not poetic emptiness, cold, hollow nothingness. Days stretch on without excitement, motivation drains away, and life begins to lose its color. It isn't quite depression, but it lives dangerously close to it. Then the cravings return, not only for sex, but for every ritual that surrounded it. The scrolling, the flirting, the fantasy, the chase. These impulses aren't just about lust, they're about control. The mind wants to reclaim authority, to fill the silence, to restart the old cycle and feel familiar again. Jung might have called this the return of the shadow, the darker, unclaimed aspects of the psyche rising not to destroy, but to be integrated. True transformation only begins when the man stops running from this discomfort, when he faces it directly and realizes that the pain isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's the signal that real change hasn't yet arrived, but it's on its way. When the distractions fade, what remains is exposure, raw and unfiltered. Most men assume that abstinence kills desire, but it doesn't. It drags it out of hiding. And once it's visible, it begins to evolve, becoming sharper, more primal, and far more honest. Here, the man encounters the beast within, not a villain or demon, but a forgotten part of himself that he spent years trying to suppress or outsmart. Lust isn't only about pleasure. It's tied to dominance, longing, and buried shame. When it rises without a physical outlet, it reveals fractures in the man's sense of identity. He realizes that what he's facing isn't just temptation. It's truth. Once lust begins to surface, fear soon follows. Not fear of the world, but fear of what's awakening inside. Who is he without conquest, without validation, without the thrill of being wanted? Alongside desire emerges the terror of losing control, the fear that abstinence might expose something he isn't ready to see. Or worse, that without sex, he might discover he's hollow. And beneath that fear lies the oldest wound, a fractured sense of masculinity. The man realizes that much of what he once called strength was simply performance, gestures that society praised, not true sovereignty. The power he believed he owned was dependent on being seen, not on genuinely possessing it. Jung's concept of the shadow isn't about evil, it's about unclaimed strength. To reclaim it, a man must stop pretending he's made only of discipline and virtue. He must face his darker impulses without shame, not to indulge them, but to own them. That's where integration begins, not through suppression, but through acknowledgement. At first, loneliness feels like silence, heavy, still, and endless. But if he endures it long enough, that silence begins to speak. Many men think they're comfortable alone. They confuse isolation with freedom. Yet as abstinence stretches on and external affirmations fade away, a new kind of solitude emerges, one that isn't defined by the absence of people, but by the absence of self. This is where the mirror appears, not a glass one, but the inner reflection. It forces him to face questions long avoided. What do I truly want? Who am I when no one's watching? Have I built a life that's authentic, or just one built on reaction and expectation? Without the constant cycle of pursuit, validation, and distraction, a man begins to see himself stripped of labels, not as a provider, performer, or protector, but as a being. And often, that realization hurts. The ambition that once drove him now feels hollow. The confidence that once defined him feels artificial. The identity he built starts to crumble, revealing a truth he can no longer deny. This isn't failure, it's exposure. Carl Jung once wrote that loneliness doesn't come from being without people, but from being unable to express what truly matters. In this silence, a man realizes he's never even shared those truths with himself. This is the turning point, because only when he faces that reflection, unfiltered and uncomfortable, can something genuine begin to take shape. When a man detaches himself from sexual pursuit, the silence doesn't simply expose weakness, it provokes rebellion. At first, the body goes numb, the desire fades, the fire dims, but eventually, something ancient begins to awaken. Not emotional longing, but instinct, a primal force buried under years of social conditioning, self-control, and moral training. It doesn't whisper politely. It growls. This is where abstinence turns volatile, not dangerous to others, but to the man himself. Because the image he spent years protecting, calm, collected, rational, starts to fracture. The hunger returns, but not just for touch or pleasure. It's a hunger for danger, for risk, for the pulse of being alive again. This isn't regression, it's confrontation. The civilized man comes face to face with his buried animal self and realizes that for years, he didn't transcend his instincts, he tranquilized them. Jung warned that whatever remains unconscious will eventually surface as fate. Repressed desire never disappears, it mutates. It seeps through moods, sabotages connections, and hijacks thought. But when a man meets it consciously, it transforms into raw energy, into fuel. The inner rebel doesn't crave chaos, he craves truth. He wants to reclaim the power that shame and fear once buried. And if a man endures this storm without running, abstinence becomes his initiation, a trial through which he learns to command the very force that once commanded him. Not every man survives this stage. The weak retreat to comfort. The strong reshape themselves. The ones who endure emerge with something unbreakable, a mind sharper than craving, a will forged in silence, and a sense of control that no indulgence can match. What we often call sexual energy is merely one expression of something far deeper, the libido, in Jung's words, a psychic force, raw vitality, the will to expand, to create, to penetrate reality itself. When a man stops wasting that force in endless cycles of craving and release, it doesn't disappear, it becomes restless. And that restlessness is sacred. At first, it feels unbearable. He wants to go back, to find comfort, to numb the tension. But if he resists that pull, something within him shifts. He begins to notice possibilities in places he once overlooked, the discipline to finish what he starts, the drive to build something enduring, the courage to choose the hard path over the easy escape. This is transmutation. Sex was never the real objective. It was a shortcut. The true goal was intensity, creativity, achievement, transcendence. Sex provided a fleeting glimpse of power. Purpose gives it permanence. So the man begins to rewire. The energy that once chased pleasure now fuels structure. His work, his craft, his training, his legacy. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." A man who fails to redirect his energy lives in half-light, never fully broken, yet never fully alive. But the one who learns to turn that same fire inward becomes dangerous in the most extraordinary way. He's no longer abstaining, he's creating. He's building something that no fleeting pleasure could ever provide: immortality through impact. When a man stops pouring his energy into chasing women, something revolutionary happens. He begins to build. In Jungian psychology, sublimation isn't suppression, it's refinement. It's the art of transforming raw impulses, lust, anger, hunger, into elevated expressions. Art, discipline, leadership, and vision. The same fire that once consumed him now becomes fuel, but only if he has the strength to contain it. Most men never reach this stage. They stay trapped in the loop, craving, chasing, releasing, where pleasure becomes their ceiling. But a rare few resist that pull. They stare temptation in the eye and don't flinch. These men gain access to a different kind of power, not power over others, but over themselves. And that's the foundation of every empire, not merely of wealth or dominion, but of character, clarity, and command. History doesn't honor men for what they consumed. It remembers them for what they created. And every blueprint of greatness begins the same way, by rejecting the trivial and devoting energy to the essential. Think of it as weaponizing chaos. The same urge that once distracted him now fuels his focus. The tension doesn't vanish. It sharpens. It gives direction to his hours, precision to his choices, and weight to his presence. This is why men of focus become dangerous, because the man who learns to sublimate no longer chases pleasure. He shapes reality. And once that happens, everything begins to bend toward him, not the other way around. Control isn't about denial, it's about direction. Most men think power comes from indulgence, from being able to take what they want when they want. But real power begins when a man learns to withhold by choice, not by lack. Because when you can say no to your strongest impulse, you no longer belong to it. Discipline isn't repression, it's mastery. It's the realization that the same force that could destroy you can also define you. Every man carries within him two energies, one that builds and one that burns. The difference lies in who commands the flame. A man who's ruled by his urges lives in repetition, always consuming, always returning to zero. But a man who governs them enters creation. He compounds, he builds, he multiplies. This is why ancient traditions treated chastity not as moral restraint, but as spiritual technology, a way to harness life force instead of losing it. It's not that abstinence itself makes a man powerful. It's that it teaches him how to hold power without trembling. To control desire is to control thought. To control thought is to control direction. And to control direction is to control destiny. This is where a man transitions from being reactive to becoming intentional. He no longer moves out of hunger. He moves from clarity. And that's the essence of control. Not rigidity, but precision. Not avoidance, but alignment. When the noise fades, clarity begins. Abstinence doesn't just quiet the body, it sharpens perception. The man starts noticing what he once ignored, the subtle motives behind his choices, the silent currents beneath his habits, and the patterns that shaped his desires. He begins to see that much of what he called freedom was actually compulsion, that many of his pursuits were simply attempts to escape stillness. This stage is uncomfortable because it strips away illusion. He realizes that most of his interactions, with people, with goals, even with love, were negotiations, not connections. They were driven by need, not truth. But clarity has a cost. Once you see things as they are, you can no longer lie to yourself. And this is where many men turn back, because clarity demands accountability. You can't unsee your own patterns. You can't return to ignorance once awareness takes root. So he begins to move differently, slower, sharper, deliberate. His speech carries weight because it's no longer seeking approval. His choices align not with impulse, but with intention. Women notice it. People feel it. The air around him changes, not because he's trying to impress, but because he's finally present. This is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing yourself, not through words, but through restraint. And it's in this silence that a man realizes he doesn't need to chase what's already drawn to his energy. After clarity comes reconstruction. Once the illusions fall away, a man is left standing in the ruins of everything false, the masks, the compulsions, the shallow ambitions. It's unsettling at first, like waking up in a life that no longer fits. But beneath that discomfort lies freedom, the freedom to rebuild with precision. This stage isn't glamorous. It's quiet, repetitive, and demanding. There's no applause, no validation, only discipline. He starts realigning his time, his energy, his focus. He no longer asks, "What do I want right now?" but "What deserves my energy long term?" The same intensity he once gave to pleasure now goes into purpose. The same attention he used to chase distraction now sharpens his craft. This is where masculinity takes form, not in dominance, but in direction. He learns to build structure, not cages. He learns consistency, not obsession. He learns that peace isn't the absence of struggle, but mastery within it. Rebuilding isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the noise began. The man who endures this process becomes grounded. His silence carries weight. His presence feels anchored. He's no longer trying to prove. He's simply becoming. And that's the essence of growth. Not the addition of layers, but the removal of everything unnecessary until only truth remains. When a man rebuilds himself from the inside, something subtle but powerful begins to radiate presence. Presence isn't about being loud or dominant. It's the quiet gravity that comes from alignment, when your words, actions, and energy move in the same direction. It's the aura of a man who no longer seeks validation because he's found something deeper, self-certainty. He doesn't enter a room to be noticed, yet people feel him before he speaks. His calm unsettles the chaotic. His stillness commands attention. This presence isn't learned, it's earned. It comes from restraint, from mastering impulses, from dying to old versions of yourself over and over until only essence remains. Women sense it, not because he's trying to attract, but because his energy is no longer fragmented. He's not chasing, performing, or pretending. His silence feels like strength, not emptiness. Presence is the ultimate form of charisma, born not from charm, but from truth. The man who reaches this point no longer defines himself through comparison. His worth doesn't rise or fall based on response. He's complete in motion, whole in solitude. He's no longer reacting to life. He's responding to it. This is what mastery feels like. Not dominance, but deep awareness. Not control over others, but full command of self. And in that stillness, life begins to orbit around him, not because he demands it, but because he's become the kind of man gravity recognizes. When the storm inside finally quiets, what remains is not silence, but awakening. This is integration, the sacred merging of shadow and light, instinct and intention, flesh and spirit. He no longer tries to be disciplined. He simply is. He no longer fights his hunger. He commands it. He no longer fears solitude. He becomes it. A man reborn doesn't roar. He hums with quiet certainty. His energy no longer chases. It draws. His presence no longer demands. It anchors. He's walked through chaos, burned through illusion, and come out forged, unshaken, unbound. Now he understands. Control was never the goal. Understanding was. Power was never in conquest. It was in calm. And desire was never an enemy. It was the key. This isn't the end of abstinence. It's the beginning of alchemy. The transformation of man into force, not by denial, but by direction. Because in the end, this journey isn't about killing desire. It's about learning to wield it. If this journey stirred something within you, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you felt that shift, that quiet pull between chaos and control, then subscribe my channel SYC Soul, where the mind meets mystery, and the soul remembers its power.